Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really getting into two very significant unmanned aerial vehicles. We're talking about the General Atomics MQ-1 Predator and its bigger, meaner successor, the MQ-9 Reaper.
Yeah, these two have really defined an era, haven't they?
Absolutely. We've pulled together a lot of material looking at where they came from, what they can actually do, which is surprisingly varied. Their operational history, where they've been used around the world, and maybe a little bit about where things are headed for them.
It's a fascinating trajectory, really, from just eyes in the sky, basic reconnaissance, to these multi-role platforms that can carry weapons. And they're used in so many different contexts now, military, even some civilian roles.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get started. Let's begin with the one that started it all, really, the RQ-1 Predator. That designation, RQ, tells you something right off the bat, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. RQ-1 initially stood for Reconnaissance, Unmanned Aircraft System. R for reconnaissance, it was the first in that particular line. The early ones, the pre-production models, were RQ-1A. Then the main production version was RQ-1B. Interestingly, the actual airframes had slightly different codes. RQ-1K for the pre-production, RQ-1L for the production ones. But yeah, the main point, reconnaissance, gathering intel.
Just looking. Purely about observation
Yeah,
first.
exactly. But that didn't last forever. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. In 2002, the Air Force changed the designation. It became MQ-1.
M for multi-role.
Precisely. That M meant it was now officially recognized as being able to carry weapons ordnance, as they call it, missiles, bombs, that kind of thing.
That's a huge shift from just watching to being able to, engage. And speaking of that, wasn't there even a plan at one point to replace actual fighter jets, manned fighter jets, with Predators?
Yeah, there was. Back in 2005, the recommendation came down from the DoD to retire the F-16s flown by the 147th Fighter Wing down at Ellington Field in Texas. That was, 15 jets?
Wow.
And the plan, which was approved, was to swap them out for 12 MQ-1 Predators. The idea was to have that unit up and running with the Predators by 2009. It really shows how much faith they were starting to put in these unmanned systems.
That is a massive vote of confidence.
Yeah.
So, okay, they had these growing capabilities, but what were they actually doing day to day? Were there non-military uses too?
Oh, definitely. It wasn't all just military ops. For example, August 2013, there was a huge rimfire in California. A Predator from the 163rd Reconnaissance Wing was used to fly over it, providing infrared video.
This was firefighting.
Yeah, to help the crews on the ground. Now, there were some strings attached, emergency approvals. It had to fly with a manned aircraft nearby, and the camera could only be on when it was directly over the fire zone.
Ah, okay. So it's still working out the kinks of using them in civilian airspace.
Exactly. It showed the potential, but also the regulatory hurdles they were still navigating. And the military was also pushing hard on making them easier to deploy quickly.
Right, getting them out to remote spots fast.
Yeah, Special Operations Command did this test in September 2013. They loaded 2 MQ-1s onto a C-17 transport plane using the special cradle system. It held everything: the drone, the control station, maintenance tent, the crew, the whole package. The goal was to land somewhere, anywhere, and be set up and ready to fly within 4 hours.
4 hours, wow.
Yeah. And apparently there was another deployment, kept kind of quiet, where they operated MQ-1s for like 6 weeks using a portable hangar and even a temporary wooden taxiway. That's pretty adaptable.
Seriously expeditionary.
Yeah.
That really shows the kind of mobility they were aiming for. But let's get back to the combat side. How were they used in places like Iraq, especially early on?
Well, right at the start of the 2003 invasion, they actually used some older Predators, almost like decoys. They stripped some gear off them and flew them in, hoping to get Iraqi air defenses to, light up and reveal themselves.
Sacrificial pawns, almost.
Kind of, yeah. It highlights that advantage of unmanned systems. You can risk the machine in ways you wouldn't risk a pilot. But then, fast forward a bit, you see them in a much more direct role. Take the 15th Reconnaissance Squadron, for instance. Between July 2005 and June 2006, just 1 year,
Yeah.
they were involved in over 240 raids, provided support for troops under fire, troops in contact 132 times, fired 59 Hellfire missiles, surveyed nearly 18,500 targets, escorted convoys, flew over 2,000 individual missions, or sorties. That added up to over 33,000 flight hours.
That's incredible. Just staggering numbers. The operational tempo must have been intense.
Absolutely. It shows how much they could be relied on for persistent presence.
But with all that data flying around, were there security issues, vulnerabilities?
Oh, yes. And this is a really key lesson, I think. Iraqi insurgents figured out how to intercept the video feeds. They used this off-the-shelf Russian software, Skygrabber.
Seriously?
Well, the video feeds, the downlink known as Rover, they weren't encrypted. Apparently, the encryption had been removed deliberately to improve performance, reduce lag, that kind of thing.
Ouch. So performance versus security.
Exactly. A classic trade-off. They were working on fixing it, aiming to get the feed secured by 2014, but it was definitely a wake-up call. Shows how even advanced tech can have weak spots.
A tough lesson learned, I bet.
Yeah.
Okay, so they became armed, the MQ-1. How did that play out in Iraq later on, say, against ISIS?
Right, so jump to June 2014. ISIS is making big gains. The Pentagon confirms they're sending armed predators back into Iraq, working alongside U.S. Special Forces.
Iraqi permission.
Yes, explicitly with Baghdad's okay. They were flying like 30 to 40 missions a day just around Baghdad, sharing intelligence with the Iraqi government too, and we saw them strike. August 8th, 2014, an MQ-1 hit a militant mortar position with a missile.
So actively engaging targets.
Definitely. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Between the start of Operation Inherent Resolve against ISIS and January 2016, the Air Force lost 5 predators in Iraq. Importantly, 4 of those losses were apparently due to technical problems, not enemy fire.
So reliability was still a factor.
It highlights that these are complex machines operating in tough conditions. They were effective, but not infallible.
Okay. And their use wasn't limited to Iraq, right? The sources mention quite a few other conflict zones.
That's right. Libya, for example, during Operation Unified Protector back in 2011, USAF MQ-1Bs flew ISR but also strike missions. The first Hellfire fired by one there was on April 23rd, 2011, hit a Grad rocket launcher.
Wow.
And there's some suggestion they might have been involved in the final attack on Gaddafi. Then you had that really tense incident over the Persian Gulf in March 2013.
The one with the Iranian jet?
Yeah. An unarmed MQ-1 was being shadowed really closely by an Iranian F-4 Phantom. 2 American F-22 Raptors, stealth fighters, were escorting the Predator. They basically told the Iranian pilot over the radio to back off.
And they did.
Yeah, the F-4 broke away. Happened over international waters. But it definitely shows the potential for things to escalate fast when you have manned and unmanned aircraft mixing it up like that.
Very close call. And they kept flying against ISIS in Syria, too.
Yes, Operation Inherent Resolve covered both Iraq and Syria. Armed MQ-1s were active there, but that also led to losses. March 17th, 2015, a U.S. MQ-1 got shot down over Latakia in Syria.
By Syrian government forces?
Yeah, by an S-125 surface-to-air missile battery. And that area wasn't even where the main coalition fight against ISIS was happening, so complexities there too.
Definitely. The sources also mention some fuzzier situations, like in the Philippines.
Right, there are reports, sometimes disputed. An alleged attempt by a U.S. predator to kill a terrorist, Umar Patek, in the Philippines back in 2006. The Philippine government denied it was a predator. Then another report in 2012 of a drone killing an al-Qaeda guy, Zulkifli bin Hir. The Philippines said that was actually a manned aircraft strike, but with U.S. help.
So sometimes the details are murky.
Exactly. It shows how sensitive these operations can be and how different countries might portray them.
And it wasn't just the U.S. flying predators, correct? Other nations adopted them.
Oh yeah, quite a few. Italy was a big user. They started with Predator A and A+ versions in Iraq back in 2005, then Afghanistan from 2007 to 2014, and they kept flying them out of Djibouti after that. Though Italy actually retired their Predator fleet just recently, end of 2022.
Interesting. Who else?
The UK's Royal Air Force, they've been flying them since 2004, and then you had former users like the US Army, US Customs and Border Protection, even the CIA's Special Operations Group used them for a time, so pretty widespread adoption.
A global platform, really. Now, before we shift to the Reaper, can you quickly run through the different Predator versions? We heard RQ-1A, RQ-1B, MQ-1.
Sure. So RQ-1A was the initial pre-production system. The actual plane was RQ-1K. Then the main production system was RQ-1B, and the plane itself was RQ-1L. The key thing is the MQ-1 designation. That specifically means the airframe could carry weapons.
Got it. M for multi-role, meaning armed.
Exactly. The MQ-1A Predator was the main armed version, and they actually removed the nose radar it originally had to make space or save weight for the weapon systems.
That makes sense. And the Predator really paved the way for a lot of other drones, didn't it? Both from General Atomics and other companies.
Absolutely. It was foundational. It led directly to other General Atomics designs like ALTS, the Avenger, Gnat, Gray Eagle, and of course the MQ-9 Reaper, which we're about to get into. But it also spurred development globally. You saw comparable UAVs pop up, like the Chinese Wing Lung, South Africa's Beit Lure, India's Rustam, the European Harfang. The list goes on. It really showed the world the value of this kind of capability. If you're really interested, you can find lists online of basically all UAVs or active U.S. military aircraft to see the bigger picture.
Fascinating how one design can trigger so much innovation. Okay, let's pivot to the MQ-9 Reaper,
Predator B.
sometimes called. This sounds like a major step up.
Oh, it absolutely is. A significant leap. The Reaper is bigger, heavier, developed from the Predator, sure, but way more capable. The biggest difference, the engine. It uses a turboprop, not the Predator's piston engine.
And that means?
Much more power, like 15 times the ordnance capacity, and it can cruise about 3 times faster than the MQ-1. That turboprop engine is key. Much better power-to-weight ratio. Allows it to carry more, fly faster, fly higher. It was really the first UAV designed from the ground up as a hunter killer. Long endurance, high-altitude surveillance, plus serious strike power.
Right, that phrase deadly persistence keeps coming up.
That's exactly the concept. The Air Force wanted something that could just stay over the battlefield day or night, find targets, and take them out. By 2006, the Air Force Chief of Staff is basically saying, okay, we're moving beyond just using UAVs for ISR. With the Reaper, it's a true hunter killer.
And how many of these does the U.S. Air Force have now? Sounds like a big investment.
As of mid-2021, they were operating over 300 MQ-9 Reapers. A lot of those have been upgraded, retrofitted for tougher combat environments, and all the new ones get those upgrades built in.
Wow, 300 plus out.
Yeah. They're planning to keep them flying until around 2035. The cost, somewhere around $33 million per aircraft in 2023 dollars. So yeah, a very significant part of their fleet.
A huge commitment.
Yeah.
How did it get developed? Were there prototypes before the MQ-9?
Yes. General Atomics had an internal project called Altair, which was basically Predator B003, bigger wingspan, 84 feet heavier takeoff weight, could carry more, fly higher, stay up longer.
Yep.
Then in late 2001, the Air Force gave them a contract for 2 initial Predator Bs, but they called them YMQ-9s. The Y means prototype. Those were delivered in 2002. The Air Force kept calling it Predator B for a while before officially naming it Reaper.
And the weapons loadout. What can the Reaper actually carry?
It's pretty impressive. GBU-12 laser-guided bombs, AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, the standard air-to-ground stuff, but also AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles, which is interesting. And GBU-38 JDAMs, the GPS-guided bombs. They even tested AIM-92 Stinger air-to-air missiles for self-defense.
Air-to-air capability on a drone.
Yeah. By 2010, the USAF had 57 Reapers and plans for many more. That really showed where things were headed. And later upgrades actually doubled the number of Hellfires it could carry, up to 8. That really shifts it from primarily surveillance to a much more potent strike platform. Changes how you plan missions.
For sure. Is deploying the Reaper more complicated logistically than the Predator, given its size?
A bit, yeah. Similar idea, though. Air Force Special Ops started a program in 2013 to figure out how to pack up a Reaper system and deploy it rapidly anywhere using C-17s. The goal was, again, speed, get it set up and flying within 8 hours of landing, even in rush spots. But yeah, like the Predator, for long distances, it generally needs a ride on a big cargo plane.
Makes sense. Now, threats change. Air defenses get better. How is the Air Force thinking about using Reapers in places where the enemy might actually be able to shoot back, effectively, contested airspace?
That's a huge focus now. A USAF scientific board looked at this back in 2015 and made a bunch of recommendations. Things like adding radar warning receivers or RWR's gear that tells the operator if they're being targeted by radar.
Okay, basic defense.
Right. Also adding more self-defense weapons, both air-to-air and smaller air-to-ground stuff, and really pushing manned-unmanned teaming, getting drones and piloted planes working together better, plus better ways to control multiple drones at once.
And are they actually doing this stuff?
They are. In 2017, they did the first test flight of an MQ-9 with an RWR pod. By 2020, that software update doubled the Hellfire load, and the Pentagon's even looking at putting directed energy weapons lasers, basically, on the Reaper eventually.
Lasers on a drone? Seriously?
Yeah, that's future stuff, but they're exploring it. And maybe even more sci-fi. In 2020, they tested having an MQ-9 carry and launch smaller drones called Sparrowhawks.
A drone mothership.
Exactly. Turning the Reaper into a platform that can deploy its own little swarm that really changes the game, potentially turning it into a hub for a whole network of unmanned systems.
That's a wild evolution.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk basics. What makes up a Reaper system? What are the specs?
Right. So a typical MQ-9 system isn't just the plane. It's multiple aircraft, a ground control station, GCS, all the communication gear, spare parts, and of course the people pilots, sensor operators, and usually a mission intelligence coordinator, or MIC, who's analyzing the feed live.
And then the plane itself.
Powered by that turboprop engine, about 950 horsepower. Top speed around 300 miles per hour, cruises more like 170, 200, big wingspan, 66 feet, can carry up to 3,800 pounds of payload, sensors, weapons, fuel.
Endurance.
Yeah.
How long can it stay up?
That's a key feature. Up to 30 hours if it's just doing surveillance, less if it's loaded with weapons, maybe more like 14 hours then. Range is about 1,150 miles, and it typically flies pretty high, around 25,000 feet, sometimes up to 50,000. That long loiter time is critical.
Yeah, being able to stay on station for that long is huge for surveillance or supporting troops. What about flying it in regular airspace, like over the U.S.? Was that an issue, like with the Predator?
Initially, yes. Same problem, didn't have the built-in see and avoid stuff needed for busy airspace. But after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, there was a push to use them for search and rescue. The FAA authorization wasn't quite there right then, but by 2006, they did get approval for both MQ-1s and MQ-9s to fly in U.S. civil airspace, but specifically for disaster relief and rescue missions.
So a specific carve-out, that's a big step toward broader use, though.
Definitely opened the door for more than just military flying.
Now, the Reaper's operational history sounds like it's seen a lot of action and some incidents, too.
It really has. There was that weird one in 2009 over Afghanistan. They lost control, it started flying towards Tajikistan on its own, and F-15 actually had to shoot its engine with a missile to disable it.
They shot their own drone.
Yeah, first time that happened, apparently. They briefly got control back, then deliberately crashed it in the mountains. Then you had deployments out of Ethiopia for surveillance over Somalia starting in 2011. They sent some to Benghazi, Libya, after the embassy attack in 2012. Stationed them in Niger in 2013 to help the French in Mali, though one crashed there due to mechanical failure.
So they weren't immune to problems or being shot down either.
Not at all. 2015 saw a spike in USAF drone crashes, and they traced some of it back to problems with the starter generator system. Then in 2017, one got shot down by Houthi air defenses in Yemen.
But it could fight back sometimes. Didn't it shoot down another drone?
Yeah, interestingly, in 2018, an MQ-9 used an air-to-air missile to shoot down a smaller target drone during a test. First time a Reaper killed another aircraft. But the losses continued too. More shot down by Houthis in Yemen in 2019 using different missiles. One got taken down over Libya that same year, apparently by a Russian Pantsir system.
And more recently, some really high-profile incidents involving Reapers.
Absolutely. January 2020, that U.S. MQ-9 strike at Baghdad airport that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Very controversial. Then later that year, August 2020, two U.S. MQ-9s actually collided midair over Syria.
Oh.
And of course, March 2023, the big one over the Black Sea. A Russian Su-27 fighter jet collided with a U.S. MQ-9, causing it to crash into international waters. Huge international incident.
Yeah, that was everywhere.
And the downings in Yemen by Houthi rebels have kept happening, quite a few from late 2023 into 2025 reported, plus claims from Iraqi resistance groups of shooting one down in early 2024. And reports that the U.S. used at least 6 Reapers for surveillance over Gaza during the recent war there. So yeah, very busy, sometimes dangerous operational life.
It really paints a picture. But it's not all military, right? NASA uses them too.
That's right. NASA flies a version of that Altair designed for Earth science stuff, studying the atmosphere, climate change, things like that. They also have an MQ-9 called Icana that they use for various science missions. It's done things like fly over wildfires to give real-time data to firefighters.
That must be incredibly valuable.
Hugely. And even watched the Orion space capsule come down during a test flight. Shows just how versatile the platform can be.
Really cool application. What about Homeland Security? Border Patrol?
Yep. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, uses them. They ordered their first one back in 2005. Unfortunately, that first one crashed in 2006, pilot error, apparently.
Oh, wow.
But even in its short life, they said it helped with a bunch of arrests and drug seizures. So CBP bought more, these Predator B variants called Guardians. They use them along the southern border and have even flown patrols along the border with Canada.
Interesting. Any issues?
They had to ground their fleet temporarily in 2014 because of a mechanical problem. And controversially, a CBP drone was seen flying over Minneapolis during the George Floyd protests in 2020.
Okay, so wide range of uses domestically, too. What about the Marines? Are they using Reapers?
They are now, yes. The Marine Corps stood up several unmanned aerial vehicle squadrons, VMU-1, VMU-3, VMU-T2, and they're operating the MQ-9A. VMU-3 out in Hawaii actually got operationally capable ahead of schedule in 2023. So the Marines are definitely integrating them.
Seems like everyone wants them. The list of international operators in our sources is massive.
It really is. The Reaper's clearly become a go-to platform globally. You've got Belgium buying the Sky Guardian version. Canada's getting 11 MQ-9Bs fully armed. France has 16 Reapers, uses them heavily in Africa. Greece is getting Sea Guardians. India leased some Sea Guardians and now has a massive order for 31 MQ-9Bs for all their services, with plans for local assembly.
India building them, too.
Yeah, part of the deal. Italy uses them, has armed them, flown them over Libya, Kosovo, the Med, Afghanistan. They lost one over Libya, too. Japan's Coast Guard uses Sea Guardians, and their Navy is testing them. Morocco's approved to buy Sea Guardians. The Netherlands is getting Block V Reapers, arming them. Poland leases some and is buying more. Spain has them for homeland security, plans to arm them eventually. Taiwan's listed as a potential buyer. The UAE, well, they lost a Predator. Plans for Reapers were discussed. And the UK is a major operator developing their own advanced version called Protector, which is based on the MQ-9B Sky Guardian. They've even flown it across the Atlantic and tested a short takeoff version called Mojave off-aircraft carriers.
It's an incredible list.
Yeah.
It really underlines its global appeal. And you mentioned different versions there, Sky Guardian, Sea Guardian, Block 5.
Right. There are several key variants now. MQ-9 Block 5 is an upgraded version, more power, better landing gear, more comms bandwidth. There was a concept for a maritime one called Mariner. The Guardian is the CDP version. Mojave is that special short takeoff and landing, STOL, one for rough fields or ships.
And the MQ-9B series.
That's the newer generation, designed to be certifiable for civilian airspace. Under that umbrella, you have the Sky Guardian, that's the main land-based one with longer endurance. Sea Guardian is the naval version with maritime radar and ship tracking tech. And there's also an MQ-9B STL version, too, building on the Mojave concept.
So constantly refining and specializing. What comes after the Reaper? Is there an MQ next?
There is. MQ Next is basically the initiative looking at what replaces platforms like the Reaper. The big ideas there seem to be around cooperative swarms, lots of drones working together, and much higher levels of autonomy.
Drones flying themselves, essentially.
More or less. Making decisions, coordinating, maybe even operating effectively if communications are jammed. It's aiming for a future where these systems are even more independent and networked.
A big leap. And one last thing that caught my eye, that the Marines putting electronic warfare pods on their Reapers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, very recent development. They're using this pod called Ardessor on their MQ-9As. The idea is to give their new littoral regiments, the ones designed to operate in coastal areas, maybe against China, better electronic sensing and potentially jamming capabilities.
So making the Reaper stealthier electronically and able to gather electronic intel.
Exactly. Trying to let it operate less detectably while figuring out the enemy's electronic footprint, their radar locations, comms signals, that sort of thing. It's an attempt to keep the Reaper relevant even in those really contested environments, although, as the sources note, it's still inherently more vulnerable there than in places like Afghanistan or Iraq, where air defenses were minimal.
Adapting the platform yet again for new threats. It's a constant evolution.
It really is. The Marines see value there, especially with these new EW pods. And General Atomics is definitely pushing solutions to keep the MQ-9 viable even in tougher fights.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, taking a deep dive into the MQ-1 Predator and the MQ-9 Reaper. Really shows an incredible story. From simple recon drones to these heavily armed, multi-role platforms used by so many countries for everything from strikes to disaster relief to border patrol. It's quite something.
It really is. And the story's not over. With things like electronic warfare upgrades, the push towards MQ Next, focusing on autonomy and swarms, these systems are constantly changing to meet new challenges.
It definitely leaves you thinking about that balance, doesn't it? The incredible capabilities versus the vulnerabilities, especially as we look at future conflicts and just their wider impact on society.
Absolutely. A lot to consider there. It's been great discussing it.
Fantastic insights. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. And a huge thank you to all of you listening for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
If you found this interesting or learned something new, please do us a favor, like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us grow the channel and allows us to keep bringing you more in-depth content like this. Your support means a lot.
It really does.
So until the next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.